Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My special guest today is Shota Adam, who is the growth lead and employee number one for Koala Sleep Company here in Japan. Shota, how is it that you call it Koala? Why is this company called Koala and got to do with sleeping and mattresses and what? Because the koala, being a native Australian, they are active at night. And they're not, they're sleeping during the day. They're the opposite to us. So, they're not fulfilling the role here of good night's sleep because they're running around at night eating. So where did the idea of koala for the name come into naming the company?
That's a very good question to start, actually. Wasn't expecting that one. It's quite funny, to be honest. So koalas, within a 24-hour day, they actually sleep 19 hours.
Nice.
So they're known to essentially be almost like, in Japan, we say, essentially the princes of sleep, essentially. They sleep all the time. So that's one thing. The other part I would say is also, obviously, the koala itself. It's a national icon of Australia. And the business koala, we actually donate a percentage of our profits towards things like sustainability. We have a partnership with the WWF. We actually, when we launched, every time someone purchased a koala mattress, which is the product we sell, we would actually adopt a wild koala because they're an endangered species. So it's to do with the fact that obviously they're essentially the gods of sleep in terms of the animal kingdom, but also the fact that koala is a business. We really care about, the planet, sustainability, things like that as well. So it's got a two-pronged meaning there.
And I love your ads, You've got the guy jumps on the bed and there's a glass of wine sitting there and it doesn't spill, I love that sort of thing, and very, very creative, so well done. So how is it that you are or were employee number one in Japan? Or why did you guys think, obviously you launched in Australia first.
Yes, we did.
And then you thought about Japan. Why you and why Japan?
Yeah, so it's a bit of an interesting story. So to give a bit of backstory on the business itself, originally launched in 2015 in Sydney, Australia. The two founders who are still with us, Danny Millam and Mitch Taylor, and those two started it together. And originally we started with just a mattress as the main product.
This is the mattress in a box.
In a box, compressed.
Business model, right?
Exactly. It's the direct-to-consumer business model, shipped to your house. In Australia, it's within 4 hours often, so that kind of thing. Very much focused on great customer experience, a lot of viral marketing as well with these D2C companies. And then in 2017, those two had the idea to launch it into Japan.
Why Japan?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question.
This is a red ocean here for sleep apparel and sleep implements, etc. So very bold move.
Yeah, so back then they were looking at a few international markets, and this is actually when I first met them, actually. And they came over. They were looking at a few markets, and Japan, although it's obviously known to be a very difficult country to break into, in terms of the developed countries within the world, it actually has the lowest average sleeping hours. And you can see that, back then, as you might recall, in Japan, they release these keywords at the end of every year, what the big theme words were, etc. And I believe in 2016 or 2015, the word itself was suiminfusai, which is sleep deficit. So there was a big theme that Japan was not sleeping well. There was potentially an opportunity there. And at the time, there weren't really any of these, direct-to-consumer, mattress-in-a-box companies, which was starting to really break through in particularly Western countries. In Australia, we already had a few competitors. In the US, that was kind of where it started. Whereas Japan, although it's a challenging market, and I would say the fact that Japanese people tend to spend less on sleep products than a lot of other countries, the opportunity was there. And I mean, luckily enough, I was the person given the opportunity to launch it.
How did you meet them?
Yeah. So I knew someone who worked in the Australian business, or someone I actually played rugby with and went to school with back in high school in Australia. So I live in Tokyo now, but I spent half of my life in Australia. And that person at the time was actually leading, marketing growth at that time. And he came over with, it was Danny, who's one of those two founders. They came over. And they didn't really know anyone, so we kind of casually met for dinner. And then they said, we're looking for someone to potentially launch the market. And to be honest, initially, I wasn't necessarily interested. I was actually trying to help them find someone in the initial stages. But before this, I kind of had a bit of my story. I was working in an advertising agency at the time called Havas, which is they were based in Aoyama, Ichome at the time. But with a friend of mine, I was actually looking to launch a business at the time. It was actually a wholesale coffee beans business. We knew Australia's oldest coffee roaster at the time. We were trying to import their beans into Australia. Into Japan, sorry. And we worked out a business model where, we could sell at a certain margin. It would essentially be cheaper than the market and deliver a high quality product. We thought we had a thing going there. We'd gone as far as basically even finding a cafe space in Tokyo. And the idea was to basically set up a cafe and sell beans wholesale to other cafes. And that was kind of the idea. And I've been working on this for about 6 to 9 months, but right as we were starting to get to the point at which we were going to do it, and I was potentially going to quit my job at the time to focus on this, my business partner actually had to leave. He left the country essentially because his wife basically, her job basically moved her to a different country and they had to move together. And all of a sudden, I was 26 at the time. I didn't necessarily have the money to launch a business by myself, and I was looking for a partner. And in a way, I discovered inside myself that I wanted to maybe launch something, whether it's a business or a brand or whatever it was. And I'd gotten a certain stage towards knowing what it would take, essentially. And this is right when I met Koala. So in a way, although I wasn't interested at the time, I kind of did have, in a way, like a somewhat matching profile. They knew this story about myself. And so there was just kind of 3 to 6 month courting process where I was trying to help them find someone, but then they were trying to get me. And it was quite an interesting experience, to be honest. I actually was pitching to them on behalf of the advertising agency I was working at to win them as a client. And then they then took me for dinner. Well, actually, I took them for dinner to try to secure the deal, essentially. And it turned into a them pitching me story. And then that was kind of how it happened, to be honest. And then I joined in September 2017. So we launched in September, October 2017, and I was employee number 1. It was a pretty crazy time, to be honest. I just turned 27 at that time, severely underqualified for these things, and you kind of just throw yourself into it. And it was a very interesting experience. I did everything from, we had to find a share office. Before WeWork had come into market, so there weren't many share offices. Setting up the bank accounts. The main thing, to be honest, was marketing. A lot of these D2C companies, we have great products, we still do, but the marketing is a core part of it. And so trying to localize that and trying to find a way to make that work in Japan, particularly when, the way Japanese people consume media, for example, is quite different than Australia. In Australia, everyone uses Facebook, for example. The majority of these direct-to-consumer companies like Koala, they focused on Facebook in the initial stages to break through, but whereas here, particularly back then, Facebook is used a lot more like LinkedIn, for example, in terms of the way people consume it. And it was only used by about 30 to 40% of the Japanese population at the time, so we had to find other means to break through. That was kind of how it went, and now I've been there, it'll be 7 years in September, actually, Greg. So it's been pretty exciting. Been through the growth journey. We had this early startup phase, probably the first couple of years, you're just trying to hustle and get some kind of momentum. And then we had we probably broke through around 2019. We really started to see a bit of momentum. We figured out a few things that would work relatively well in Japan in marketing. And you're also building trust with, the business overseas, because a really great challenge early on was the fact that Koala Australia, when it first launched in Japan, it had just won the Startup of the Year award. It was very much highly esteemed within that industry. The approach was very much try to use that approach for marketing in Japan, but that didn't necessarily work initially. So we had to find ways to build that trust and, figure out what worked in Australia and try to localize that, but also find a strong voice for Japan as well. So eventually we kind of had a little bit of momentum.
What was a strong voice for Japan that you found?
I'd say early on, it was about finding examples that would essentially spike revenue or show some kind of momentum gain. And then getting the founders or, other people in the business in Australia to take note of that. So one example I can call out, for example, is, so I said for example about 10 times just there, but in Australia, we have a showroom. Very few people actually go to that showroom. People in Australia don't tend to actually want to try the product physically. The reason for that is you purchase it, it comes to your house, you can actually trial it for 120 days, so essentially 4 months, and you can return it for free during that time, which back then was a very innovative business model. You see it a lot more nowadays. And Australian people are much more comfortable just taking that and returning if they feel like it, Whereas in Japan, the hurdle to returning, people just don't like doing that. Once they purchase, they just don't like returning, even if you offer that service. We still have this, interesting challenge today. It's a bit more mainstream now, but people just don't like doing it. So as a result, that step before purchase is a little bit more challenging. And so in Japan, we found that people really wanted to try it physically, actually wanted to try the product in a store, that kind of environment. And early on, we're looking in the data to see, sales weren't growing, but we knew customers were coming from certain areas of Tokyo by looking at things like, Google Analytics and whatnot. I was kind of pointing out, saying, if we do maybe like a physical pop-up event, people would come, potentially would sell. And they kept saying, no, that's not going to work. People don't come to these things. In Australia, no one comes, etc. But I kept, trying that out. So early on, literally when it was just myself, one example I did was, do you remember, you've been here a while, right? You might remember a place called Commune 246 in Aoyama. It was like
I don't know. No.
Okay, fair enough. It's in Omotesando, and it's basically like essentially a beer garden with a bunch of little cafes and things like that. It's an old parking lot. And there was a caravan in there that you could rent as an Airbnb. And I knew the person who operated the Airbnb. Again, back then, startup times, very little, we didn't have much budget essentially. So I called him up and basically said, look, usually he would charge a certain amount for an Airbnb. It was like, a couple of $100. But I said, if I can put my mattress in there, I'll pay you a little bit more. And could I run like a pop-up event just for 2 days, just to see? So we had no money, but I guess you find a way to do it in these early stages, We did it, ran, a few Instagram ads to tell customers this was on. And I basically did all the sales myself, made flyers. We have this koala suit. Like we actually have like a mascot called Coco-chan. It's like a human size, one of those big koala shaped things you see at like a Disneyland essentially. I would wear that suit and then do the sales, take it off, all these things. And it was crazy because at the time, I don't want to disclose too much about our sales, but we're probably selling, 5 or so units a day at max, in terms of mattress. Whereas at this time in Australia, we're selling 100 plus, so we just look very, very minuscule. And we did this one pop-up event, probably cost maximum $1,000, and we generated probably 50 sales a day over that Saturday and Sunday. And so things like that, people take notice. So you have these little examples, and you kind of do them by hook or by crook early on. No one wanted to do that pop-up, but by doing it, it kind of showed how Japan is different, and we built a bit of trust. So things like that helped us to find our voice.
And so initially it's just you.
Yes.
So how does it work? You start recruiting people, you're responsible for Japan at this point to grow the business here. So you have to go and find people to work for you?
Initially, yes. So there was very little budget. So we had a little bit of support from Australia in terms of running the media, essentially. So for things like Facebook ads, etc., we had a little bit of support, but obviously there's no Japanese language. So we hired a couple of Japanese interns who were based in Sydney to help us out.
Oh, okay.
So we did that early on. And then following on from that, again, marketing was the key thing. So we hired a couple of, startup-y marketers to help us along the way. And another core part of Koala is customer service. So we actually had a customer service person who's still with us today. She's actually moved into a completely different, she's actually now head of operations for Koala Japan. But she was based in Sydney at the time and was our first customer service agent. Early on, very small team, and I kind of slowly grew that team out over here as well.
But how do you convince people to join?
Yeah.
Because, you're a startup.
Yeah.
It's a bit counterintuitive. Why do we need a mattress from Japan? There's tons of mattresses here. Why would I join this company? It sounds highly risky to me. This guy looks 12 years old.
Exactly.
Right? He's the boss, really?
Yeah. It was a challenging time, to be honest. And you're right. Historically, Japanese people tend to prefer to work for, big corporations. They're relatively risk averse, I would say. So I think it was all about selling them on the fact that, I would say our culture in Koala, Koala Japan, Koala Australia, it's built by, I guess, Danny and Mitch themselves. When they launched the business, they were 27, 28. They're very rambunctious. They're very, very clever people, but they also know how to have fun. So we really talk about that side of the business, the fact that, we're going to work hard. We also talk about the vision and the fact that, Japan at the time, lowest average sleeping hours in the world. We can solve that problem. So you talk about that vision, how we can potentially be a part of that. And then it's also about just finding those right people. Although we can say Japanese people are, I guess a little bit more conservative in some respects, there's people out there that want to try these new things, and it's about finding those people during the interview process. And we were really lucky. I say I was employee number one, but we had some great people who came very early on, and without them, we would not be where we are today. Yeah.
And so, as you're growing the business, you presumably you're the local expert on Japan, and people are following your direction, following your ideas on how to grow it. What did you find worked well to get them to believe in you and follow you? How did you engage them?
Yeah. It's still something, I'd say that's still something I'm almost figuring out today, to be honest. I look a lot to other leaders. I learned a lot from other people in the business, also outside of the business as well. Early on, I found, at the time, again, I was 27, 28. I had a lot of imposter syndrome in terms of whether I was actually fit for the seat itself. I think early on, to build trust, being honest, it's all about just hustling. And I found that getting business results, getting those few examples to build trust, really helped early on. That was probably the main thing. So
you're leading from the front.
Exactly.
And you're the trailblazer, coming up with the ideas. So if you do pop-ups, they work.
Yeah.
So that builds credibility, that builds belief. Well, he may look 12, but actually he's right.
Exactly.
Pop-ups worked.
Exactly.
Everyone said it wouldn't work. He's the only one who knew what he's doing.
Exactly.
Maybe we should listen to this guy, right?
Exactly. That's kind of how you do it, to be honest. That's how I did it.
When you talk about fun, Australian sense of fun, Japanese sense of fun, may not be exactly the same sense of fun. So how do you translate that type of concept from one culture to the other?
That's a very interesting one. I think one thing, I'm trying to think, again, it's something that we're still figuring out, I would say. Early on, I noticed in Australia, we'd have we'd bring people into the office on a Friday afternoon. We used to do a thing called Friday Fridays, where basically we'd have some kind of talk, the kind of people that potentially come on, there's people like Eddie Jones, I guess, who you've had, or...
So you're inviting speakers.
Exactly. You bring speakers into the business. They talk about some kind of leadership experience or some kind of business, experience again, or something like that to the team. But then after that, there'd be very much more informal, drinks at the office kind of things.
How big is a team?
In Japan or Australia?
Japan.
The current Japan team is about 40 people.
So it's quite big.
It's quite big now, yeah.
But it didn't start with 40. You built it up to 40, right?
Exactly,
so you're recruiting people for specialist tasks, and then as the business grows, you need more support for supply, or you need more support in marketing, or you need more support in sales. So you're adding people. And when you recruit the first people, they're bound to be the hardest group to recruit because the risk is the highest factor there for them. But you come in and there's 10 people. That's quite a different proposition to there's one person. So in a way, success builds on itself, doesn't it? So as you scaled, as you grew, did you find that you had to change the way you engaged people? Was there something changed all the way you had fun, or how the culture built? Any changes you had to make as it grew, scaled?
That's a very interesting question. I would say you kind of touched on it yourself when you were asking the question, but as we grew, early on we're hiring, I guess, very hands-on, startup-y type people, not necessarily experienced, but as you grow, you begin to hire.
Where do you find these people?
At the time, we were just being really honest, looking on things like LinkedIn, through friends. We also looked on tools like Upwork to find freelancers. You're as hands-on as possible. I was literally looking myself and trying to find these people on online platforms. But
if I'm on LinkedIn, I get an email or an in-mail from Koala, coming to work for Koala, right? What? Who are they? That's a pretty high barrier.
It is, yes.
That's a cold call and one of the chilliest ways of doing it. So how on earth did you make that work?
That's a great question, to be honest. Back then, I try really hard to have an elevator pitch around. I think it's going back to the fact that, we were the first direct-to-consumer sleep business in Japan, and really selling the vision around the fact that you're part of something new and exciting. You're looking for those kinds of people. The reality is, going back to the previous question, there are people that just don't gravitate towards that. And even during, the hiring process, oftentimes some people will say they want to be part of things like that, but then along the way you realize they don't necessarily want to. And that's also a challenge. Sometimes it happens even after they join the company. So I think that, I'd say it's a challenge we never fully nailed, but something we definitely, I would say, worked well because we actually managed to hire well.
Well, I mean, you've gotten 40 people together. I mean, everyone's having trouble hiring people today because of the population decline and risk aversion on the part of Japanese staff. So to get to 40 is an incredible achievement in such a short space of time.
Yeah.
Well done there. In terms of, you had a perspective on Japan which the founders in Australia didn't have, obviously, because you've grown up here in some part of your life and you understand Japan and you're willing to try things. I guess what you don't know is a good thing because you don't know that it won't work, so you try it anyway.
Exactly,
And then you realize, well, that didn't work, or it did work, right?
Exactly.
But in terms of getting ideas from the 40 people, or as the staff grew in number, so it's not just relying on your relatively limited business experience to be the sole source of ideas, for the business. How did you find ways to get people to contribute their ideas?
Yep. I think a key part, we still talk about this today, is creating an environment with psychological safety. Yeah, as you mentioned.
It's a sexy term. What does it actually mean? We're all having, at 2 o'clock, we're all taking a nap.
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about? What are we talking about here?
I think, you've somewhat touched upon it yourself. But essentially, in Japan, I mean, there's that cliched saying around, the nail that sticks out must be stuck back in. You hear that, 100 times a day. And people, it is true that people...
it's more brutal than that. It must be hammered down, isn't it?
Hammered down, this is true.
Right? Hammered down, not just put back in its place, but hammered down.
Yeah. So there is that to a certain degree. But I think the way, and not just myself, but the other leaders in the business, we really create an environment where we encourage those ideas as much as possible. And, we use specific examples where, great ideas can come from anywhere. But to speak of one example early on that comes into my brain immediately, we used to have this intern in marketing who then went on to do other things within the business. But at the time, he was an intern. And we were looking for, ideas to grow the business. And he had this idea. In Japanese, we call it dakimakura, which is essentially a body pillow. It's a pillow that you hug, essentially. And he had the idea to basically make this essentially a koala version of it, a koala body pillow. And again, it's not someone who was...
So what, had little ears or something?
Had little ears, very squishy face. Yeah, we still have... I'll bring one next time, essentially. But it was his idea, and he wasn't in the product team. He wasn't even really a full-time marketing team member at the time. And it's this thing that we ended up trialing out on a small basis, and it was very, very successful. Kind of became like a viral hit, and we used it for multiple years. So I think using examples like that early on and telling the team, you might be in this department, but you can still contribute to another department as well. And we've actually executed upon these examples. Kind of builds credibility within the business that you can actually provide ideas and the business will listen.
So are these things that are being rewarded? Like in some companies' cases, they'll actually hand over dough or dinners or something, as a actual monetary reward for idea creation? Or is it a case of that's the culture we like around here and you have the potential to come up with an idea and we'll actually put your idea into reality?
Yeah.
And you get to, see your creation in real form.
Yeah.
And that's the inherent joy of that for you. No money involved. So how did you work that?
I would say it's more the cultural side of things. A big part of our culture, it's actually written in our cultural values around innovation and disruption. The business itself originally the whole idea was to disrupt the mattress industry early on. And then we've now gone into furniture and other categories. So it's really just inbuilt. It, to be honest, comes from the founders. And that's part of the reason they hired me, is that I was seen to be, although I didn't have experience, I was creative and somewhat disruptive in the way I thought. So the idea is we kind of really push that. It's more a cultural thing, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah.
And as you grow, I mean, say initially when you got a very limited number of people and they're a sort of scrappy bunch of misfits by the sounds of it, right?
Absolutely.
Because they're the sort of people who are willing to take a risk to join a startup like that.
Yeah.
But then it matures, and it gets bigger. And as you say, some people, they may have enjoyed the scrappiness, but then it gets a bit more formulated.
Yep.
And they don't enjoy it as much and they leave, but other people prefer a bit more structure, join.
Yep.
So you've got stages and phases in business, right?
Definitely.
And it grows in itself. But what have you found worked well to build trust with people. Now, as so, you're very young, you look very young.
Thank you.
And you're actually, 7 years ago, so you must have looked like 12 years of age.
Exactly.
And you're the guy in the koala suit. Yeah, where's the boss? So that's him over there in the koala suit,
Yeah.
Really,
Yeah.
So what did you do? What did you find worked well to build trust in you to follow you and what you're doing here? If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now.
In terms of building trust, I think what I find works, or what I hope to do moving forward, and like the way I've tried it in the past, is I think just being as authentically myself as I can be. Like I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm constantly growing and trying to learn new things as well. But just being unabashedly clear about who I am in terms of as a person fundamentally, and then I guess that translates into who I am as a leader. And I would say in terms of who I am as a person and how my values, if I was to kind of somewhat summarize them, as one, like I do think I'm very growth mindset oriented. It's a bit of a crash cry, but I tend to be someone that tries to learn a lot from other people, and I'm always doing courses and whatnot to try to grow myself. Like I don't think I wouldn't consider myself someone who's naturally super intelligent or anything like that, but I do think I'm constantly getting better. That's one. The other one is I tend to I value creativity a lot, not just in the sense of, you touched on content of Koala, for example, but I really like to find creative solutions to problems, and I cherish that from the people I work with as well, and I admire people who can do that. And the final one is I do enjoy life a lot. I'm someone that likes to have fun. I'm someone that's always been into music and sports, for example. Like I actually, when I was younger and I was in university, my first job was actually in the music business, working in live music venues and doing marketing and those. So I learned a lot from creative people as well, and I think that probably influences who I am as a person. And then sports as well. Like I've learned a lot of teamwork I played rugby growing up, and I still go to a lot of games today and whatnot as well. So I think just being clear about who I am as a person, and just being clear that I'm not perfect. I have things I'm working on all the time as well. I think that tends to build trust and build relationships. Ultimately people, hopefully, they follow people, leaders as people as well. So being clear about who you are helps build that connection.
And how do we make that clear? It's one thing to say, I'm being authentic about who I am, but how are you communicating that authenticity to the team?
I think that's still something I try to learn from other people, and it's still something I'm learning from. Early on, I don't think I was good at this. I think, when I first came into Koala, I was very much trying to prove that I could even do the job, that I belonged there in the first place. So I was very much kind of guarded about who I was as a person, to be honest. Particularly being young, as you said now 10 times, looking young, I really wanted to prove myself. So I think I had a bit too much of a barrier between myself and my team in a way, because I was trying to establish that I was, I guess, the boss in some sort of way. Mm-hmm. But this didn't work. I would say that I didn't have trust early on.
How did you know it didn't work?
I could just tell. I think some of my early relationships with staff just didn't go as well as I wanted them to be honest. We got good results. I'm really proud of who we are, but I don't have relationships with every single one of those people today. And I think with the people that I have led well, they're people that I consider friends, not just peers, but friends still today. And so that's something I failed at in the past that I think I've learned from. Nowadays, I guess, again, constantly still working on myself, but something I do find this sounds very simple, but just spending informal time with people, just talking about, what you're doing in your spare time, the things you value, etc., and listening to those people is something I've learned a lot from, to be honest, our current country manager, Ruslan Selnok. When he came in, he really started to, bring people, into the office to try to do more things, informal time. We'd go for drinks, lunches and things like that. And he's very good at, I think he's very, very good at listening to people. And no matter who you are in terms of, where you are, I guess, within the hierarchy of the company, etc., he's very, very good at really listening to them and trying to understand who they are and where they're coming from, and then taking that to try to actually drive the business forward. And that's something I've learned from him probably in the last couple of years.
So you're running the show, basically starting it up for X number of years, and then they bring in someone more experienced to take it to the next level. Is that how it works?
Yeah, at that point, that's how it worked, yeah.
Right. So, in that startup phase, where again, it's scrappy, it's nothing's going to be proven, you've got a certain resource base in Australia and things that have worked there, but not everything that works there is going to be working here. Yeah. So there's got to be a bit of experimentation, a bit of juggling, a little bit of manipulation of things to make it suitable for a Japanese market. So thinking about that, how much were you able to bring across from Australia? Like that, those people jumping on the mattress with the wine sitting there, I guess that's shot in Australia. They could be anywhere. It doesn't have to be Japan. Yeah. That sort of concept, but you see it on social media. So, what proportion were you able to sort of just, okay, we take what we use in Australia, bring it over here, as opposed to, well, no, that doesn't quite fit. What was it, like a 50-50, 70-30? What was the breakdown?
I'd say early on, the business was trying to push almost like a 80-20 towards Australia. That was how it was in the beginning because it was doing so well in Australia and we wanted to see what would work. And it very much didn't work. My very first day in the business was actually a video shoot for the launch video, which we were doing at the time. And the idea itself was coming out of, I guess, the Australian creative team at the time. And the concept of the video, it's actually, I think you can still see it on our YouTube page actually, but it's essentially around the fact that Japanese people aren't sleeping enough and we've come from Australia to save Japan. And it just didn't work, to be honest. And the reason for that is, if I'm as a Japanese consumer, I'm half Japanese, but from that perspective, most people can't change the fact that they're actually sleeping 6 hours a night. That happens because we work late in Japan and there's like a lot of things happening, at a more cultural level. So as a Western company that no one knows, if you come in and kind of come from over the top and say, hey, Japan, you need to sleep more, no matter how cute your koala is.
We're here to correct you.
Yeah, essentially. That's a message that didn't work, to be honest. And we still kind of talk about that today. So once we changed the messaging and, really
But how do you change the messaging? Because, you've got a creative team who think that this idea of, sleep deficit Japan needs help. Here we are. We're the white knights, so we're going to give them a missing formula here for better sleep through our mattress product. And then that doesn't go anywhere because people just don't resonate with it. But how do you then iterate to find what will work with them? Is this coming from you? Is this coming from your team? Is it ideation? Is it experimentation? How do you make that shift to work out, well, that went flat as a pancake. Let's try this instead. How does that process work?
Essentially, it's testing, essentially. You test and see what works. A lot of Koala is focused on digital marketing. So thankfully with that, you can actually see, how people interact with your advertising, if they're clicking, if they're watching to the end of a 15-second ad, etc. And it was just through that, to be honest. It was finding those ads that worked, the messages that worked. It was also down to, which marketing channels worked. It wasn't necessarily Facebook. It was more in Japan, the digital channels that we had a lot of success on were more things like YouTube, which you use more. We also, television is very important in Japan. So how do we get ourselves...
television?
So this was an interesting one. We couldn't afford television.
I was going to say, that's like, serious money, right?
One of our early successes that we worked out as a team is television is very expensive. It costs you need at least $1 million even to just get on there in Tokyo, to be honest, with any real frequency. But one thing we learned early on was how powerful it would be if we could find ourselves onto television in an organic way. Okay. And so what we did... So
your news...
Yeah, we turn ourselves into news, essentially.
Your news, and you then get consumed, and the medium is the existing infrastructure that someone else is paying for.
Exactly.
And you supply the IP for them for the news programs.
Essentially,
right? How did you do that, though? Because, again, there's no shortage of Japanese companies here selling mattresses or whatever. And okay, you come from Australia, so what?
Yeah.
Where's the attraction? Where's the interest? The koala thing. We like koalas, okay. But how did you make that happen? How did you actually get into the industry and say, here we are, come and interview us, come and see what we do?
Yeah, I mean, it is down to finding interesting content for these TV channels. So what we worked out early on is, as someone in Japan, I'm sure you would have seen that a lot of these Japanese television shows are what you'd call variety shows, where they're sending celebrities around to try out, it's often different foods or whatever's trending. So we found that, these shows have writers, and these writers are basically looking for whatever is trending in Japan throughout the year. And we looked essentially within, I guess the Japanese, you can call it seasonal or cultural calendar, and sleep as a topic actually trends, at the time anyway, this is back in 2018 or so, it trends at certain times of the year. And one is February and March, which is the moving season, because at the end of the financial year, end of the school year, a lot of people move house. So they buy furniture and sleep products. The other one is now, it's actually June, because it's humid and rainy season, so people can't sleep well. And the other one is September, October, because that's another moving-ish season, at least at the time. So we worked out that if we could build essentially like something like a PR stunt, and tap the media, essentially let them know, these television channels, that we're doing this in a very easy to access location, they might come.
We're going to put a mattress on Shibuya Scramble, and
that kind of
guy
thing.
in a koala suit's going to have a big nap there.
Exactly. That's the kind of thing, to be honest, that's exactly the kind of thing we did. We did a sleep lab, in Omotesando, where you could, get your sleep analyzed by people in Koala, lab coats, etc. And you could do the white. It was pretty visually eye-catching, which you need to do in Japan as well. And it legitimately worked. We had these TV channels come.
So they're in a koala suit with a white lab coat.
Yeah, that kind of thing as well, yeah.
That's true. That's very cool. That's very cool.
And then they would do the wine glass test on television. And that really, we saw these big spikes early on. Again, early on, you're really creating...
Did you think to get Sumo Tori to come and do it?
We didn't quite get to do that, unfortunately.
Not the guys who, the famous guys, but the younger guys,
We
a little bit lighter perhaps as well.
Potentially, yeah. We do actually have a couple of sumo-oriented ads on our YouTube page, which you can see. So, yeah. But yeah, that kind of thing worked. Getting on television, and again, once more, in Japan is different to Australia in a way, and showing the power of that. Again, that's the kind of thing that again builds trust within the team, but also with, I guess, the heads of the Australian business as well. So by doing that, we kind of built up momentum, which now, we're still learning every day. So it's a constantly changing industry, but we've figured out a way to kind of somewhat keep Japan growing as well.
And what about culture? Because you have a startup culture, and then you have more of a mainstream culture as you grow in size and you scale, and the size of the revenues go up, and the amount of funding that's available to invest in the business and hire maybe more experienced people, a little bit older people perhaps as well. It starts to change the fabric of the organisation.
Definitely.
Right? So what have you seen works well with keeping aspects of the culture which you want to keep, but also being able to scale the culture to be a little bit more mature, sophisticated organisation?
I would say we're constantly working on this and iterating, but just having the team and the business's cultural values really clear at the get-go, and really...
So what are the cultural values?
So it's currently the 3 words are, I don't know if I can actually share this on camera, but it's ambitious, curious, and selfless.
I don't think there's any patent on any of those 3 words. I think you'll probably be okay.
But we try to find people, if I was to kind of summarize in my own words, it's people that tend to... Again, I don't think this has changed greatly from the beginning. It is people that tend to want to try new things and are more adventurous. Because although we sell furniture and that's a consumer good that's probably not that exciting to that many people, the idea is to be disruptive within that space. So you want people who can think that way. And then it's also people that are, I guess, curious, which connects to that, but trying to find new solutions in order to grow the business as well. And then finally, I guess the selfless is our 3rd value. So just finding people who are team oriented, not selfish and things like that as well. And you try to find people like that. And again, I'm sure you'd know this much better than me. You don't always nail that part, right? You learn as you go, and you're right. Early on, it was a very startup-y team, and now we have a mix of startup-y people and people who are more experienced in their fields. Particularly now in Japan, as we've gone into things like business to business, selling to hotels, and once you go to physical retail as well, you tend to hire people that are more experienced in that space, and that's a more traditional industry. So finding that mix between those people and I guess that kind of more youthful part of the team, it's a challenge. And I think it's also, to be honest, a lot of fun to be a part of, because the team itself gets along really well. There's people that think very differently amongst each other. That also adds to the, I guess, concoction of the team. You get diversity as a result, and I think that's a really fun part of working in Koala. Yeah.
And I guess you're right. When you're a challenger and it's sort of us against the world, it's a tremendous glue.
Yeah.
And not only us against the world, it's us disrupting the world.
Yep.
When I was at Shinsei, we were doing that with the major banks. We were disrupting them. And just working in that business, it was fantastic fun. And it was invigorating. And you felt, unified. And the little guy taking on the big guy and beating the big guy, type of thing. Yeah, it generates a lot of core values and similarity and purpose and dedication and people working towards the same aim. In terms of if someone, called you up and said, "Hey, Shota, you've launched a business here in Japan, and I'm thinking of bringing your business into Japan. You've done it. I haven't done it. I don't know Japan. You know Japan. What would be some advice you'd give me?"
I think one thing we learned very early on: make sure you physically go and talk to your customers is very important. When we launched in Japan, we worked with a couple of research agencies just to get a bit more understanding of the Japanese market, etc. And you get that, but the insights we got when we actually spoke with customers were, to be honest, quite different.
So these are people post-purchase you're talking about, or
no,
pre-purchase?
It's pre-purchase back then. There's more people who, may be interested in a mattress. We learned one thing I would say, as I give a specific example. Japan as a country, the population split, income rises, particularly once it goes after 35, I would say. And so we were told our target consumer should be a mid-30s and up, early 40s family, living in a home, like living in an actual house, etc. And that's what we were informed. What we actually learned when we actually came to market was that wasn't the core customer early on. It was an early adopter, mid to late 20s, who was willing to try something. Essentially someone who's more digitally native, because a brand like Koala.
Can they afford enough space for a big bed mattress, though? I mean,
turns out they did. I would say
it's the whole room. The one room apartment is one massive big mattress in it.
It'll take up the whole space. But that turned out to be what actually happened early on. So you get this kind of thing where when you actually speak to customers and people that authentically connect with your brand, you learn more that way. So I think that's point one. I think the other one I would say, one thing I still hear a lot is people will say this won't work in Japan, and they dismiss, Japan as it is a different country, but without necessarily explaining why. And I think it's important to really challenge that every time and think about why. Like for example, we talked about TV early on, and people kept saying, you must pay for television ads, you must get on. To do that, but obviously
you need a celebrity.
Exactly.
To represent
That's another
the firm.
one.
You need an expensive celebrity and an expensive TV program.
That's exactly
with expensive advertising.
Yeah.
And please give us $1 million and everything will be good, right?
Exactly. And obviously we couldn't afford any of that, but then we talked about how do we get on TV, and we talked about the idea early on about virally getting onto television by PR stunts. That was because we challenged the notion of that, So really thinking about the why behind that question is also really important, I think. That's probably the two I can think of right now. Yeah.
In terms of, from a leadership point of view, any hints or guides you'd give them on leading the team, if they're going to go through a startup phase or they're expanding the company, the scope and scale gets larger. Any hints for them on how to be, because you as a leader have to change, right? You can't, you're leading a scrappy team of misfits who are the startup team to mature people joining who've got years of experience in retail, who are going to take on a different role. Yep. As a leader, you have to be very flexible and deal with all of that. So, and this person would obviously have the same difficulties. Any hints for them on how they can make that change?
I've learned a lot of this from, I guess, other people in the business who I've met along the way. I'll probably reference the founders here, to be honest. Like the first one, I'm lucky enough to still work with Mitch and Danny, the two founders right now. And Mitch, one thing I've learned from him is he's just relentlessly obsessed with the business. He's always just thinking about solutions. I've been in a work environment, or even if you just go for a drink with him after work, he's just always obsessionally
He's
figuring out.
on.
Well, yeah, he's always on.
He's on the whole time.
Yeah, and I do think early on in that team, particularly in a role like mine was, you do have to be obsessed with it. And I think setting that, not burning people out, but really setting, being clear that, this is the goal, this is what I'm trying to do. And I think as long as you do it a certain way, that can be inspirational to people. And then the other one is...
You don't want to become a black company, though.
No,
where you're
absolutely
just
not.
flogging people
No, that's the thing.
relentlessly, and
No.
they're not getting enough sleep because you're working them so hard, right? It's the irony of that.
Exactly. So you definitely got to watch that. And then the other one I think is that I learned from the other founder, Danny, is that he's always looking for what's good and new today. Figure out what's working today, not yesterday, but really finding innovative solutions in. It could be marketing, it could be multiple things, and really trying to figure that out. Because I think also going back to your point, obviously you don't want to burn people out. We actually don't want to do that, and that's not our culture at all. But also in terms of keeping people inspired, I think showing people what's happening today, new trends. Right now, we're very much focused on what's happening in the digital media scape, for example. Showing what's happening outside is also really important because it kind of gets people to think outside the box as well. I think that's probably two things I can think of. Yeah.
In terms of, you're still relatively young.
Yeah.
But you've been through quite a unique experience.
Yeah.
I would say, few people have probably been through what you've been through. And you talked about rugby and teamwork and, experience you had in live music houses and stuff. And so you've drawn on a number of experiences to form ideas and ways of work. Have you had any particular business habits or personal habits that have served you well in your career so far?
Very good question. I'm a very, this might be quite boring an answer to be honest, but I'm a very routine-oriented person.
Okay.
In terms of keeping myself aligned in terms of, I guess, finding my own optimal performance is very important to me.
So does that mean that you have a journal, time is carved out and allocated, to-do list? Do you have an electronic version?
Yeah.
Or I have a physical organizer, which I've got what's on every day, and I've got the week and the month and the year and blah blah blah, and I'm doing to-do lists, and I can't type very well. And when I had a meeting this morning with a client, no good me trying to type what they're saying. It's easy for me to write down, make notes on what they're saying, and capture that. So that works for me. But what about for you? What do you find works well for you?
It starts before that, to be honest. I do think a lot about things like nutrition, and to be honest, sleep does come into it. I don't want to talk too much about that topic because obviously Koala. I don't want to push it too much. It's a given, exactly.
Everyone at Koala sleeps 12 hours a night as part of the company you play, right?
Exactly. But one thing, I'm quite health oriented, so the way I eat during the week does affect the way I work. So I concentrate a lot on my things like my ability to focus, my concentration, and my energy levels throughout the day are very important. So I found, growing up, I really used to enjoy eating like a big breakfast, for example, to start the day. But nowadays I find that, to be honest, that kind of thing tends to slow me down at the start of the day. So I actually won't consume any calories till lunch, for example. So things like that, where I'll wake up in the morning, have a routine around either going for a jog or exercising, and then ensuring I have essentially like a healthy lunch around 12ish, etc. That kind of sets my baseline. And then before that, there's the sleep. And then in terms of organizing myself, like yourself, I do journal. I organize myself digitally, and then I'll tend to write down my key priorities in a kind of diary type setting as well. And then I do also do a lot of journaling and meditation, etc. in my spare time as well, just to kind of keep myself level, if that makes sense. Yeah.
I notice myself that my biorhythms are good or better in the morning. Late afternoon, start dragging the chain. It's good. I just don't have the same levels of creativity.
Yeah, exactly.
And I know that about myself, so I don't try and ask myself to do any creative work. I do it in the mornings.
Yep, I'm the same.
And I tell the team, it's like a sort of running joke here that if they come to me with something that requires a creative answer, I look at my watch. Hey, listen, it's after 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
You know the rule. Don't ask the boss for anything creative after 3 o'clock. Come see me tomorrow,
Yeah.
It's a joke, but it's not a joke.
That's not a joke. I think it's true.
I know myself, I'm just not functioning at that peak performance level at that time of the day for creative work. I may be doing something else that's less creative, but I can do that. But knowing yourself. But what about resilience as well? Because, you started before COVID.
Yep.
You went through COVID.
Yep.
You come out the other side. You come out the other side, we've got 40 people.
Yeah.
Amazing. So you got a big feed bill right through COVID.
Yep.
But I guess, what have you found works well to stay resilient?
In terms of resilience, I mean, I can't say it's a topic I've completely nailed. I think, we're still here today at Koala, so I think I've probably gotten over challenges more often than not. But there's also been times where, it's gotten to me, or like the business, for example, as well. I think if I was to think back to a time where I personally failed at resilience, for example, is, when we were thinking back to our growth journey, we grew a lot around about the third year when we really started to really take off. And then we grew into the fourth year, and then COVID happens, and it really took off, to be honest.
It took off.
It really, in a positive way.
COVID was a positive for you. Wow,
exactly.
Lucky you.
It did really, really well.
It was not a positive for us, I can tell you that.
Really.
I'm glad to hear someone benefited from COVID.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people got stuck at home and they needed mattresses, I guess, and furniture. Yeah, because
that's what was the case, wasn't it? A lot of people reinvigorated their home environment because they were spending so much more time there than before.
Yeah.
And things that were annoying before on a weekend basis became annoying 7 days a week.
Yeah.
And we need to, refit or retool. Or so that, I can see why that would work. Yeah.
Exactly. And we did grow significantly in that first half of COVID, I would say, but then we're expecting you kind of just expect to keep growing when you're particularly in a startup mindset. And it didn't, and the growth slowed. And, I think at the time I was slightly old. I was just turning 30. But it was a lot for me at that time when it stopped growing, and it felt like it was kind of on me, because it was. And when it slowed down, I felt very personally responsible. And to be honest, that was a point at which it became too much for me. I did burn out a little bit. And I think I learned a lot from that in terms of making sure things we talked about earlier around keeping yourself keeping yourself regulated, the health elements, etc., are very important, but also making sure that you don't take everything personally as well. And when mistakes happen, you don't want to make it. I'm not the kind of person that says, make lots of mistakes, and, it's great to make a lot of mistakes, but you also don't want to make too many at the same time. But really trying to make sure you don't take them personally, and learning from it and seeing what you can do to move forward after that is very important. Because back then, I think I was just so afraid in terms of if the business stopped growing, it'd all be, my fault essentially, or if I'd messed up. But in reality, there was things I definitely did wrong as well. But also at the time, the industry itself was slowing down. I didn't have the intelligence to know that was actually happening. But
it's also very hard to see industry trends when you're in the middle of the trend.
Yes, exactly. You're kind of in the storm.
You come out of the trend, you look back and go, oh, that's what happened. We were part of a trend, as opposed to at the time, oh my God, the platform's on fire.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're losing money.
Yeah.
How are we going to pay that payroll?
Yeah.
So it's hard to have that outside perspective when you're in the turmoil of it.
Exactly. And I think, going back to your question, I think you build resilience by having episodes like that, because I've now been through that step. And since then, there's been other episodes where things have gone wrong or dramatically right, etc. And it kind of just keeps you level. You know that if things are going well, you're not necessarily a genius at the same time. There's multiple things happening. And it's usually down to other members of the team. But, when things go wrong, it's probably not quite as bad. And I don't catastrophize things quite as much as before in my own head. And I think that also builds resilience. And I think that's probably a theme for a lot of, youngish leaders, where you feel, it does come down to that imposter syndrome a little bit, where when things go wrong, you internalize it a lot, it's because I'm not good enough or something. Whereas in reality, it's somewhere in between. You're still building resilience, you're building experience, but the reality is, it's that in-between point, I think. Yeah.
What about your definition of leadership?
Oh.
How would you define leadership?
Very good question. I think the leaders that I aspire to be like tend to be someone who can kind of clarify where you're going and have some kind of vision that people can see, have an end goal, etc. But I think what I aspire to be is more not just doing that, but also making people excited about it. I think creating that emotional connection, and not just at a team level and saying we're going this way, but I think if you can connect with individuals on the team around how it benefits them, I think then you can really build a strong team. It's still something I aspire to be like, to be honest. There's been times where we've had success, or I've had success, but also lots of failure along the way as well. But that's where I'd like to go. I think having a team that's, very, very engaged, excited about what they're doing, and, personally motivated to achieve that goal, I think then you have a really strong I think emotional connection within the team is very important to me. Because at the end of the day, you know, I spend more time with my workmates than I do with, you know, my family or my partners, etc. Partner, sorry, I should change that. Can we rephrase that bit? It sounded really bad for a second there.
We'll cut that bit out.
Yeah, I definitely don't have partners, Jesus.
All right. So, in a moment, I'll ask you if there's any. Well, I'll ask you now. We don't have to do this on camera, but
Yeah.
Is there anything that I haven't asked you you'd like to add about leadership in Japan? If you don't have anything, I won't ask the question. I'll just close it out. But if you think you've got something, then I'll phrase it for you.
Sure.
And then you can add your 2 bobs worth.
Well, I mean, I guess you as a host, like, how have you found this? Like, is there anything specific you'd like me to talk more about?
No, it's just all about you. It's not about me. Yeah. It's all about you.
I think I'm okay.
We covered it all?
Yeah,
okay.
I think so.
Right. Then I'll thank you. We'll close it out.
Yep.
So, well, Shota, thank you.
Thank you.
It's been interesting hearing your journey and going from 1 person to 40 people right through COVID. That's impressive. And good luck with what you're doing. I mean, that sleep deficit, I don't think that's going away too much too soon. So there's always always a need. So join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.